This is intimate. Not quite what I expected, but I did not expect anything in particular, so that's fine. It's all good. My mum is here, so. Big moment. Anyway, just like to thank Steve for inviting me to do this. If you guys have noticed around you, there's the kind of scrawlings of a madman on the wall. He's been doing this kind of epic writing project that has been a kind of improvised, almost automatic style attempt at ambitiously scaling a novel via scrolls, and kind of just makes me think of the kind of Hollywood trope of the psychopathic collage vibe, you know, when they always show the killer and it's like hefty. That's what I've been going for. So I imagine it's kind of similar to that. But okay, well, I apologise if this seems overly stuffy or a tad formal. I had in my grandiose vision some chairs and the notion that I would be talking about something that I don't know. So apologies for that. So there's a caveat that this may seem a little bit overblown. Scrap out fireworks. So tonight the idea was that we looked at the exchange, interaction, hybridized form of film poetry and film, and I think approached as that, as film poem and poetry film, it is often something that emerges as quite self-consciously uneasy, queasy, a little bit pretentious, and has certainly opened the floodgates in the last sort of 10, 20 years with kind of online platforms and camera production being a lot cheaper to kind of a lot of literal voiceover and poems being read and literalised visually, which can be a bit dull. But there is, of course, a huge history of this exchange, and that's what I wanted to just look at in this little presentation, which, in tribute to poetry film uneasy hybridised partnership, I have done slightly poetry, slightly presentation. So if it sort of meanders in and out of sense and of interest, sort of, if you could mask the co-imposed confusion, that would be nice. Okay, so I'm just going to nod at Cameron, who has very kindly helped out here, so thanks. I'm going to nod you for slide changeage. So, there we go, straight trigger happy. Okay, so arranged and rearranged in emphasis and intention, opening up an exchange between and across mediums where like is lyric eye to subject, as lens is seeing eye to object, neither speaking on behalf but half of speaking out of nowhere, or as a gesture of translation from language to light, reverse from image to text, frame to word to frame and page to screen, or as screen as page and film as poetry and back to poetry reimagined as film. Taking time between takes to find time between frames, or framed as time taken, time as framed might be spoken. By film syntax, in the grammar of cutting, how rhythm, movement and focus constitute our reception of meaning, our ways of meaning, as found, projected, disrupted, ambient, curated, referential, pointing to the world, presented as a world. In his 1929 film Man with a Movie Camera, Ziga Vertov, no, that was the, doesn't matter, leave it, it's fine. No more flourishes, I apologise. Ziga Vertov proposed a truly international absolute language of cinema, which the previous slide demonstrated. In contrast, Abel Gance, the French film director known for his silent epics J'accuse in 1919, La Rue in 1923, and Napoleon in 1927, remarked that the marriage of image, text and sound is so magical that it is impossible to disassociate them in order to explain the favourable reactions of one's unconscious. Next slide. Surrealism celebrated cinema as a way to emulate and reveal the unconscious, to enter the darkness of a cinema as if into a shared communion of sleep, to watch dreams play out across the screen. In 1928, the surrealist Man Ray directed a short film in response and accompaniment to Robert Desnos's poem, L'Étoile de Mer. A swinging disc of light silhouettes a starfish as it turns in black. The handwritten title is penned by Man Ray, who, in describing his reaction to Desnos's poem, said, "There was no dramatic action, yet all the elements for a possible action. A circular window opens, a clouding through as blur. We watch the woman, her garter pulled up towards her thigh. Deferred desire begins the gazing first line of Desnos's poem. Women's teeth are objects so charming.
One of the earliest film poems, Male Desire and Its Frustration, experienced as a dream, in a dream. Whose dreams film and poetry's film dreaming as who? The surrealists found poetry, like the unconscious, as a subterranean glimmer, in films that had no intention or acknowledgement of such readings. Louis Aragon observed that on the screen, objects that were a few moments ago sticks of furniture or books of cloakroom tickets are transformed to the point where they take on menacing or enigmatic meanings. For Aragon, film could endow with a poetic value that which does not yet possess it. The surrealists embraced the early comedy of Mark Sennett, Chaplin and Buster Keaton and found the pulp banality of the Fantomas, haunted by mystery, weird and unintended moments that coax the film's dream into speaking. Next slide. Edo Kairu, the Greek filmmaker and writer, extolled the virtues of popular film, advocating that we should learn to go and see the worst films. They are sometimes sublime, suggesting now an afterlife for Adam Sandler films, the Transformers franchise, and Eddie Murphy's underrated Norbit. Yes. In the thinking about film and poetry, a trajectory of experimentation suggests itself from the visual influence of Cubism, Dadaism, Hans Richter, Ferdinand Leger, Marcel Duchamp, the French Impressionism of Germain Dulac, the Surrealism of Man Ray, Dali and Buñuel, and these were all then influences that sort of stormed, percolated, confused each other, stumbled, tripped, and influenced the American avant-garde in Maya Deren, Kenneth Anger and Stan Brakhage and many others. But like the surrealist appreciation of populist film, poetry also inhabits the history of narrative cinema, a history that is not confined to Hollywood or populist codes, but that are often sought to combine or respond to the concept and praxis of poetry. Jean Cocteau's Orphic trilogy, 1930, 1950 and 1960. A card game ends in suicide, applause, walking through snow, a gloved underworld, guardian motorcyclist, the ruined city passing through mirrors, a radio speaks through static, intercept speaks through interpret, seance, the chirping radio speaks through fog crackle of overheard afterlife of poetry as a return, brought back in sound through sight, afterlife in film as film. Pier Paolo Pasolini published his first collection of poetry in 1941 and continued to write throughout his life. He would often describe his work as the cinema of poetry. After realizing with disappointment the intent and nature of American avant-garde film, Pasolini declared his belief in narrative poetry in film. Ingmar Bergman's 1966 film, Persona, overlaps, splits and merges the identity of two women as the material of film itself is seen to rupture, straining to show, to represent, to pierce the image and repeat the image, enacting a trauma beyond words but relating to language, a failure of language and the imagining of film as language. The montage at the film's start, a crucifix, an erect cock, a tarantula, a silent comedy, a man is chased by Satan, the slaughter of a lamb, and a boy wakes up in hospital. A boy turns on a TV. What is your name? The boy backs away from the screen. We inhabit the screen. It is in black and white. My name is Yuri Zari, comes the reply from inside the screen. We see it as though we are there, as if there is no screen. It is an adolescent with a stammer. With a stammer, even. Jesus, apologies. With a stammer. He continues to be questioned by a physician. Look right into my eyes, she says. We watch her hypnotize him until, having declared the release of his tensions, he is able to say, without stammering, I can speak. This is the beginning of Andrei Tarkovsky's 1975 film, The Mirror. Tarkovsky understood poetry as a genre beyond literary definition. So it's not as a genre, but existing in and as the indiscernible movements of being, beyond coherent logic. For Tarkovsky, the indiscernible movement of being is time. Film, as the medium best equipped to render time, was for him consequently the perfect art of poetry. Poetic cinema was not symbolic cinema. It should be, according to Tarkovsky, metonymic, to call upon, intuitive association, from which disparate parts move towards, in suggestion of the film brought together as a whole. As Joseph Cornell, the American artist and filmmaker, suggested, it is not the carefully composed images, but rather their ultimate relationship to each other that generates the poetic connection. Cornell collaged old film reels, worked from found materials, observed still moments of the ordinary. In a park, on the subway, the city's back street rambling in reverence of a stone angel. In 1936, spliced and edited a cheesy jungle melodrama, Easter Borneo, 1931, recut and presented as a feverish ode to its female lead, Rose Hobart. The poetics of position, arrangement, combination, collage as language. constellate glances coming back to it, to catch it, something like deep forest or tapestry, where the everyday is found suspended as the occasion, from the aviary whose ceiling dreamt of snow or the shadow box that is dreaming still, impossible to fix in words but speaking. Cornell worked with other filmmakers of the American avant-garde, Larry Jordan, Rudy Buchard and Stan Brakhage. Brakhage referred to his own film poems as just that, film poems, I apologize. Reading with a religious commitment the poetry of Robert Duncan, Charles Olson, William Carlos Williams, Ezra Pound, Zukowski, Creeley, Michael McClure and Ronald Johnson. These were communities that intermingled, friendships, correspondence and the continuing of a conversation. In the US, the Beats, the Black Mountain School, the New York School, all were influenced and in turn influenced their contemporaries in the underground film scene. From Kenneth Anger and Jack Smith to Alfred Leslie, Robert Frank, Rudy Buchard and Andy Warhol. Allen Ginsberg stares out from his screen test. John Ashbery stares out from his screen test. Ted Berrigan, Diane DePrima, Marcel Duchamp, Willard Mass, Harry Smith, Joe Brainard, John Wieners, John Guierno, Susan Sontag, all staring out from Warhol's screen tests. Before eyes opened in factory light, screened at a slowed down 16 frames per second, and a year after Ian Hugo's film, Bells of Atlantis, a film with a voiceover by Annis Nin reading from her hallucinatory book, House of Incest. My first vision of Earth was water-veiled. I am of the race of men and women who see all things through this curtain of sea, and my eyes are the colour of water. On October 28, 1953, Cinema 16 held a symposium on poetry and film. The impressive panel included Maya Deren, Dylan Thomas, Parker Tyler, Arthur Miller, Willard Mass and Amos Vogel. It was here, between the unengaged comic quips of Dylan Thomas, that Deren put forward a distinction between the horizontal and the vertical in film. The horizontal embodied the linear development of plot, presented and experienced over sequential time. The vertical embodied the suspended exploration of associations that can coexist in a moment. Concerning the use of language within a film, Deren reasoned, words are not necessary when they come, as in the theatre, from what you see. However, if they were brought in on a different level, as if you were standing at a window and looking out into the street and there are children playing hopscotch, well, that's your visual experience. Behind you, in the room, are women discussing hats or something, and that's your auditory experience. You stand at the place where these two come together by virtue of your presence, a curious combination of both, and that is your resultant image. Language should not name what is shown in feeble overlay, a tautology that crowds and detracts, but in a near alchemical difference or disjunction that together inflects image with language and language with image. Brakhage went on to develop what he referred to as visual ineffables, films he believed could stimulate experiences of perception and recollection outside of language, as it was currently defined, films that were haunted by movement, tone and texture, but unnowned, devoid of recognizable shapes, objects or subjects, a beyond or before of language, a creation of light glyphs. In the 70s, the primary vein of experimentation for American poetry was channeled into language poetry. Materiality of the word as object signifies stripped transparency placed above and before its referent. It found its filmic counterpart in the structural materialist experimentation of Michael Snow, Hollis Frampton, Owen Land and Tony Conrad, amongst many others, and in the UK, the prominence of the London Filmmakers Co-op. Fixed framing, medium surfaced. As groans move, skin of flicker, beam out their projection beams, screen so grit, looping print, weight of it, weight of lit, waiting as the process pulling, move, minutes matter. Waiting focus wave of length of cinematic bored into focus as wave boring, duration length scored on surface of medium, touching light as lasting, again until waves, again is lasting over frame. Say, are we good? Can move?
Somebody get in.
Yeah.
Hey!
Don't take me for a
Sorry.
That's alright, I'm gonna shop you.
Wow.
So yeah, we're just doing a presentation, wandering. Okay. Resume! So yeah, I was just sort of wandering into materialist film, this idea. It's all good, it's all good. Yeah, got it, it's good. I drifted them out myself, it's all good. Anywho,
Cinematic, born into, focus as wave boring, duration length scored on surface of medium, touching light as lasting again until waves, again as lasting over frames. Say is saying, reading in ray is staying, film screened is frame state. Not new, but always having been there. So magical that it is impossible to dissociate. Not new, but gaining in popularity, in proliferation. William Wiese published the significant essay The Poetry Film in 1984. Poetry film festivals began to appear in the 90s alongside television commissions and a growing interest expressed in literary poetic societies. The 90s also inaugurated the publication of Film, Poem, Poem, Film, a periodical brochure from the South London Poem Film Society, emerging alongside regular film poem programmes curated by Peter Todd at the National Film Theatre. On the back of this momentum came work from the filmmaker and poet Tony Harrison, and the call for rules and a manifesto rhetoric. And the notion of the British film poem seemed, at least for a small coterie, impatient to assert its own identity, a voice that in the flurry of increasing popularity and institutionalised support seemed to stray from a history of genuine interrogation and innovation towards weaker concepts of hybrid collaboration and dogma. And in saying that, I don't want to eclipse all of the really exciting avant-garde film stuff that was going on in Britain in the 70s. I did not have time to kind of get that involved, but I'm sort of talking about this emergence in a more public sense in the 90s. So we have poem film, the film poem, film poetry. It continues, as not new, but always having been there. Slide 15. Thank you. Light. Online platforms, more affordable camera technology, the conversation accelerates. Available on multiplied, streaming, archived, links, samples shared and found as collage in montage. As uninspired, uninteresting, pretentious and infuriating as with the internet oceans of shit, through which occasionally the profound or unexpected breaches, where the between a film of poetry is reminded of its continuing experiment, arranged and rearranged in emphasis and intention, opening up an exchange between and across mediums where, like his lyric eye to subject as lens is seeing eye to object, neither speaking on behalf but half of speaking out of nowhere. Thank you.